quick because it's mostly just using your calculator to do these problems for you. Yay! Unfortunately, on the test, there are several of them that I say you cannot use a calculator on. All right, so we have x minus y equals 2. We have 3x minus y equals 12. In order to solve using matrices for right now, we only know the Gaussian elimination method. So that means we need to put it in an augmented matrix. Our augmented matrix should be a 1, -1, 2, 3, -1, 12. The first thing we locate is left to right. We locate which one needs to be 1. It's already 1, so we're good there. Then we're going to look for all the ones that need to be 0 in that same column. Well, that 3 needs to become a 0. The way to get rid of that is to multiply the row with the 1 in it by a -3. So -3 times row 1 plus row 2 is going to become my new row 2. So we're going to have -3 times 1 plus 3 is going to be 0. -3 times a -1 is a +3. Minus 1 is 2. And then finally we have -3 times 2 is going to be a -6 plus 12 is a +6. And row 1 did not change. All right, now we move from column 1 to column 2, and we locate what needs to be 1 in that column. That happens to be this 2 here. I'm going to multiply that entire row by 1/2 to turn that into 1. So 1/2 times row 2 is going to become my new row 2. Blah, blah, blah. We're going to have no change to row 1. And row 2, we're going to take half of everything. Half of 0 is still 0. Half of 2 is 1. Half of 6 is 3. Right there, we actually know which one of those to pick. Because I know right now y equals 3, and the only one that has y equals 3 is A. So if it was multiple choice, you could probably end there. But let's continue on. I need to turn that 1 into a 0, which just takes adding row 2 to it. So we're going to have row 2 plus row 1 is going to become my new row 1. Well, that 0 plus 1 would give me 1. 1 plus -1 is 0. And 3 plus 2 is 5, 0, 1, 3. That tells me that x equals 5 and y equals 3. All right, before we get into today's lesson, does anyone have any questions from the homework? Nora? Sure. I guess the hard part about 33 is just the decimals. Yeah. It really is the decimals that throw everything up. So what you could do, one option you could do is you can multiply that entire first row by 10 or by 5 or by whatever you need to get rid of the decimals. As an example, because let's look at our two things. So we would have 0.4x minus 0.2y equals 0. And the bottom one is x plus 1.5, y equals 2. So what you could do is you could just get rid of the decimals. Right now you could get rid of them. If I multiply this by 5 and this by 5, I get rid of the decimals there, and we could do the same thing here. The problem with that is when I start adjusting it, it might go back to decimals and fractions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in an augmented matrix just to start off, just to see what it looks like. So the augmented matrix I would have would be 0.4, -0.2, 0, 1, 1.5, and 2. I need to make that a 1, which means either I multiply it by like a fraction to turn it into 1, or I can locate this 1 down here and just put it up here, or, so we have a lot of options, I guess. Yeah. So perhaps I multiplied everything by, I don't know, 10 on this one. So say I multiplied everything by 10. And that would make this entire row 4x minus 2y equals 0. So now I multiplied everything by 10. It's still even, so I can replace that with a 4 and a negative 2. This is if you didn't recognize you could just switch this, because you won't always be able to switch this with decimals. So in that case, we would have 4 and negative 2. Well, now to turn this into a 1, if I didn't recognize I could just switch those two, now I can just multiply that by 1/4, right? So we can go 1/4 times row 1 becomes my new row 1. And now I'm going to have fractions here. So I'm going to have 4 is going to turn to 1. Then we'll have negative 2 over 4, which is actually negative 1/2, which I could just turn into 0.5. And 1/4 of 0 is still 0. Then we have 1, 1.5, and we have 2. And right now it's looking like it's going to be a lot easier to deal with just because of these 0.5s and these 0.5s. Because now to make this one 0, I'm just going to multiply row 1 by a negative 1. Negative 1 times row 1 plus row 2 becomes row 2. In that case, all right, negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Negative 1 times negative 0.5 becomes a positive 0.5. Plus 1.5 becomes a 2. Well, that's nice. Now we have 1, negative 0.5. We still had 0 up here, which means negative 1 times that 0 plus 2. This is going to remain a 2. Right? And then now we would just multiply this entire row by 1/2. And then we should be able to get back to 0 pretty easily. Okay? Is that far enough, you think?
Yeah, that's awesome.
I know what I did. In the answer guide, I did it slightly different because I did immediately switch this.
Yeah.
I didn't really deal with the decimals. I kind of just used them. But sometimes it's just easy if you can multiply by 10. Just get rid of the decimals in one of the rows. It can make your life a little easier. Because then you're not thinking about, okay, 0.4 times what gives me 1 in this first. If your first step is really hard, then it makes the whole problem seem really hard, right? But you can always get rid of those decimals by multiplying by 10. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Okay. Then let's go over how to use our calculator to do this exact same thing for us. And all the steps are here, but maybe it makes a little more sense when we actually go through it. So the first thing I want to note is we need to write this as an augmented matrix. So I'm going to do it down below. I should have probably made more room for this. But the augmented matrix of this would be 2, 1, 4, 4, 2, 8. What my goal is to type this exact same thing into my calculator. And we do have a matrix. We do have a matrix button that's going to allow us to plug that right in. So let me get this all squared away and then bring up my calculator. All right, I should have my calculator already up. My Wabbit. My Wabbit's right there. All right, here's my Wabbit. So where you're going to locate your matrix is right here. It looks like it's x to the negative first, but you're just going to hit that second button, and then you're going to hit your matrix button. Once again, you're going to hit second, and you're going to hit matrix. Does everyone have a screen that looks like that? Cool. All right, if I click enter right now, I'm not asking you to, but if you do, it's going to put A on your home screen, which means whatever's in matrix A is now being used on your home screen. You don't want to do that because you don't even know what's in matrix A. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that. I'm going to go back to my matrix. If we look here, we have a math button. that allows us to do different stuff with matrices, but what I want right now is edit. I want to hit second matrix, and I want to go to edit because I want to edit what A actually is. So we're going to go ahead and edit A. Currently, matrix A is a 1 by 1. I don't want a 1 by 1. We're going to look at that augmented matrix that we have. The augmented matrix has 2 rows and 3 columns. So I want to change this to a 2 by 3. And now I should have the perfect number across for me to put that augmented matrix in. If you remember, that augmented matrix that we had was 2, 1, 4, and 4, 2, 8. So we're going to put it as is. So I'm going to put a 2 right here. I'm going to hit enter, and you should see a 2 pop up. Then I'm going to put in my 1. Then I'm going to plug in my 4. Then I'm going to plug in my 4 down here, my 2, and finally my 8. Now I'm going to make sure I hit enter on 8. Here's a big thing you need to do next. You need to hit second quit. You need to hit second quit before we do the next thing. Otherwise, what we're trying to do is going to try putting it all in this one little space. Do we all have this matrix? I don't want to get ahead of anyone. Because this is the hardest part, honestly. Everything else is super easy with your calculator. All right, if we're all there, I'm going to go ahead and hit second quit so I can go back to the home screen. Because what I want to do now is all going to happen on that home screen. I'm going to once again hit second matrix. This time we're going to see A is now that 2 by 3. That 2 by 3 is saved in this spot. What I want you to do is go over to math, because we want to do something. You just need to remember this. We're going to go down to RREF. That's reduced row echelon form. That is the exact same thing as Gauss-Jordan elimination. Reduced row echelon form is turning it as best it can into the identity matrix. So that is what your reduced row echelon form is. You don't have to remember those words, but you do need to know that RREF is the button you need to do Gauss-Jordan elimination. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on that RREF. And now it's asking, what matrix do you want to do that with? So now we got to go back to that matrix screen. And we want to use matrix A. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter on A. I'm going to close that parenthesis. I'm going to hit enter. And it's going to come up with 1.52000. So what that's saying is we have an augmented matrix that's 1.52000. What is the answer to this systems of equation? Emma? It is dependent. It is dependent, and that's all the work you need to do. Your calculator just solved that system of equations for you. Yeah, Mark.
How do you clear what's in the A? Because eventually you're going to run out of letters. And you'll have to start over.
Oh, I would just, so what I would do is, rather than clearing it, is just I'm going to hit second matrix. I'm going to go back to edit, and I will actually edit that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I probably won't go to a new one. We are going to have times where we're multiplying matrices together, so we will have to use an A and B, but I won't fill them all up, because otherwise you forget what letter you use. I will every single time, if I'm starting a new matrix, I always put it in A. Because you can always look at all these numbers in here. I can still change this back to a 1 by 3, and it will just adjust to it, and I just hit enter, and I am now editing those again. It just makes more sense for you not to have to remember, oh, did I use F or did I use G in this one? You know, just always go back up to A. All right, any questions on that? Okay, then on your homework, I want you to do 2 things. So if you look at my answer key, I want you to have 2 different things. I want you to have the original augmented matrix, and I also want you to write the matrix that your calculator shoots out at you. So that'll be the one with the identity matrix, or as close as it can to that identity matrix. And then I want you to list what your answer is. So like x equals 1, y equals 2. Or you can put it in a point form, which is how I did in the answer key. But you can go ahead and do that x equals, y equals, or z equals, however you want to. Are there any questions for me on that? Yes?
If it's dependent, we just write dependent.
Just write dependent, because there is no other answer. Yep. All right, guys, the rest of the time is yours. You should probably be able to finish this. Yeah?
It's like fine that there's no line, right?
It is fine that there's no line because your calculator doesn't have the, it doesn't need it, right? Because it comes out with the exact same thing. So they didn't code it in there saying, do you want to do an augmented matrix versus a regular matrix? You have to know it's an augmented matrix. Your calculator will still work just fine on it. It just doesn't know it's an augmented matrix. Okay? It's a waste of coding, basically.